Before he took home Oscar Gold for Parasite, Bong Joon-Ho was best known for his hit film Snowpiercer. Maybe you've heard of it. While I personally love the 2013 movie, I admit that TNT's television show is growing on me. It turns out comparing the two is like apples to oranges. But that doesn't mean that I'm not about to do just that. In fact, quite the opposite, so grab some popcorn and enjoy the deep dive. The year 2014 is gone and past. However, to the makers of Snowpiercer, that's just a tiny detail. What matters more is the time on the train and how it's affecting our survivors. The movie focuses on events that happened 17 years after the freeze. To put that into perspective, the TV series is only 7 years after. There's a whole decade between these two moments. While 7 years feels like a lot of time to be stuck in train carts, barreling endlessly into oblivion, the show doesn't play to that expectation. There are veterans in the tale section who show signs of revolutionary fever. Still, the seeds of discontent are only starting to bloom when the viewer catches up to the television series. The anger and worsening conditions are at an all-time high by the time we get to the movie. The tale section is now a second generation into these conditions and raising a third. They've seen a few revolutions start up and falter, all in an attempt to bring equality to Snowpiercer. The difference brings up plot holes and serious questions regarding the relationship between the two concepts. In fact, at times, the show acts as an eraser for the significant accomplishments Curtis manages. 1,001 carriages all linked together to form the only surviving shred of humanity on the planet. That's the pitch. Even in the movie, we're meant to understand that the train is huge. Though I'd argue that the train's full size and scope are complicated much more by the snow. It gets explained, but we're still left with a lot of questions. One of my favorite parts of the film is the unique production design. All of these carriages hold unique characteristics. You can't help but marvel at every creative idea that pops up as the group goes from compartment to compartment. The unique flavor Bong Joon-Ho gives Snowpiercer wasn't replicated in the television series. They did their own thing instead. For the show to get similar results, the production team relied on scaling up the train. We get lots of sets and fresh looks into society on this train. Then, there's the moment when Leighton and the revolutionaries are forced to decouple a large portion of the train. At least it explains why there aren't so many carriages. Side note, how does Big Alice only come up 7 years into the story? It's a circular track, so where was this train hiding that whole time? Of course, the train, the setting, and everything else were all approved by Bong Joon-Ho. So these differences are all graced by the man with the bigger vision, in case any of you were wondering. Knowing that helps me enjoy the series a lot more, especially considering the risk they took with the story. The original Snowpiercer is a biting social commentary anchored with stylistic action pieces like this brilliant siege in the tunnel. Curtis climbing the carts to seek the engine is a straightforward goal, even with some of the side characters' motives being shrouded in mystery. The audience gets a clear idea of where this story will end. In contrast, the revolution part holds firm in the television series, but it's played out like an afterthought for a lot of the first season. It's not until the later episodes that the actions of the tailors begin to matter. Now, I'd argue that the TNT series gives more pace and respects the time they're given to delve into the lore. Hence the sci-fi noir storyline that dominates the majority of the first season. Season 2 appears to build out more of the dynamics we see of the film, but there's a lot of unresolved tension to sort out.
I thought we were an autonomous collective.
You're fooling yourself. We're living in a dictatorship.
Yeah, what he said, am I right? But seriously, there's a lot of political drama baked into Snowpiercer. All of that world building helps the viewer discover the tension between the tiers of this hierarchical society. Imagine a government where the people who sit first class on a Delta flight have more rights than you. What's that? The government already works for the wealthy? Oh, okay. That's depressing. That sad thought aside, picture that same thing, but with claustrophobia.
You're scaring him!
The class system of Snowpiercer remains mostly intact between the show and the film. There's the head of the train, and then there's the tail. Between them is a swarm of different types of people trying to survive this long trip to nowhere. The film shows involuntary tailors being forced up the ladder to amuse the rich and replace broken parts on the train. The series isn't quite this rigid at first. There are chances for some promising tailors to move forward, and not many children are being stolen to become cogs in the eternal machine. All this appears to be changing now that Mr. Wilford is back in charge. I'm guessing the system's about to get a lot less flexible. A quality protagonist is necessary to drive any story forward with purpose. Both Curtis and Layton work well in the stories they inhabit. What I find wild is that these two guys live in the same place. Their experiences and motivations cause a noticeable difference in these two Snowpiercers, even if their role stays somewhat the same. You have to remember that Curtis is somewhere on the train during the television storyline. He's a lot younger and more appeased at the time. He's no leader, it's not his generation in charge at the time, and Andre Layton represents the earliest leaders of the Tales section. Layton's background as a detective gives him the privilege of examining the train and its design. He uses this trust to help form the first successful revolution. Curtis is one of many leaders in the revolution by the time his plan is executed. What's more, he's spent time in a famine and multiple suppressing events. He's no fool, and the train's secrets aren't as significant thanks to Layton and the others. Curtis has a lot more to work with, and as of now, we got a lot more of his backstory because he spent so much time on Snowpiercer. God, remember the first time you watched Snowpiercer and got to the scene where Curtis confronts Wilford? There was so much mystique and tension in that conversation. Wilford meant something entirely different at that point in the film compared to the start. Personally, I didn't think there was a way for the television series to match that hype. Thank goodness I was proven wrong. Casting Jennifer Connelly as Melanie Cavill was a stroke of genius. Now, I know she's not actually Mr. Wilford in the grand scheme of things, but does that even matter? She is the leader of the entire project and the head engineer. I love how Melanie acting as a replacement for Wilford helps create a part of the mystique we see in the movie. Getting a chance to see Sean Bean in the role will be nice, and I'm excited to hear the voice of Wilford matter in a whole new way. Still, I did enjoy the subversion Connelly brought to our conception of Wilford during her time in the role. I think nothing matches the OG Wilford, but technically, he's no longer the OG, so yeah, that's confusing. Now, this last entry is something I struggled with placing on this list. I don't want to come off as a snob here, you guys. I realize that the budget for a television series doesn't usually match the money available to a studio film. But that being said, there are differences, so we can compare them, knowing the showrunners have some limitations. Obviously, the production design is the most significant influencer on this contrast. Snowpiercer the movie benefits from robust costume design and high-grade cameras that pull a lot of color from each take. The show gets as close as it can to replicating some of the more vital parts of the look, but their lighting setup and costumes don't always rise to the same level. I want to note that there are things done in the show that illustrate their ability to change for the better. The animated opening for both series is brilliantly designed and adds a lot more than any animation from the movie. It's also remarkable that the train's CGI holds up for the most part. Computer graphics have come a long way since 2013, and the show makes that clear. Overall, both versions bring up a lot to like, so at least there's that. On a higher level, the differences between these two stories represent each artistic medium's pros and cons, not to mention the fact that these two Snowpiercers are based on the 1982 graphic novel Le Transperce-Neige that spawned these adaptations. See, I could have gotten a lot more academic here, but I resisted. You're welcome.